what's behind me. If you walk back here, you'll be seen. Otherwise, you'll only be heard. And if you want to catch up on what we've been doing, there's months and months of archives. So where we are right now, we're kind of in this middle spot in the Sugya. We're in chapter 4 of Tractate Sanhedrin. Just to bring us up to speed, this tractate of Talmud deals with laws of judicial proceedings. It's really concerned with judges, how judges interact with testimony, how judges apply rules in the Torah to make their rulings. And we just came through a passage about the liability of the judges if they're wrong. That there's a system where the judges, if they get something wrong, might actually have to make good the money that they cost somebody in that. So the passage we just did on 34a is we were doing a series of conversations where we were trying to find the Torah proof. Hey, Evelyn, how are you? Do you have your own text?
I think so.
On 34a4. We were exploring possible proof texts from the Torah for why a person or a judge is not allowed to bring evidence for conviction in a capital case at the end of the trial. So in the Mishnah, the basic text that we started studying, that starts all Talmud study, there was a line that said, a person who argued for conviction in a death penalty case can change their mind for acquittal, or can then speak afterwards for acquittal. But a person in a death penalty case who starts with acquittal is then not allowed to change over for conviction, which tips the favor of the process in the favor of acquittal, of not executing people. So there's a large tendency in rabbinic literature to not want to execute people. Death penalty is in the Torah, so you can't say death penalty is wrong, but you sure can legislate it almost out of existence. And that's what happens in almost all of the treatments in the Talmud, is that procedure after procedure, limitation after limitation, makes it practically impossible to convict somebody of a death penalty. And even if they're convicted prior to their execution, it's possible to reverse the verdict and to acquit them. So the favor is in that direction. There was also a question about not just the judges changing their mind, but just who is speaking. As far as, when we first read the Mishnah, we thought it was the evidence in front of the court, that you open with acquittal, and then later you can hear from conviction. And our thoughts was at that time you would hear first from the witnesses for the defense, and later for the witnesses for the prosecution in a capital offense. Remember, in monetary cases, you can hear from anybody in any order, and the judge can flip their opinion beginning, middle, or end of the trial procedure at any point. There's also, just to refresh our memories, there was the concept that monetary cases, you would open and close the courtroom in one day, come to your verdict, and enforce the verdict. That all happens in a day. In capital cases, you can acquit in a day, but if you are convicting of a death penalty offense, you have to wait until the second day. And the reason for that is presumably let the judges think it over, let the witnesses think it over, and let any other witnesses have time to arrive. Because if at the end of the court day no verdict is announced, everybody knows what? Convicted. He's going to be convicted, because if it had been an acquittal, they would have wrapped it up. So now they say, we will meet again tomorrow. And everyone goes, oh my God, this guy's going to be convicted. And maybe some witnesses out there who thought it was an open and shut case realize that they have to go and they have to testify now, right? So you buy this extra day. Now, the reason that didn't help us is for the last page or so, they've been playing with who are we talking about? And it seems that they're interpreting the Mishnah now not as witnesses, but only as the judges. And when it says a judge, cannot open for acquittal and then speak for conviction, there's a disagreement about whether that means while they are deliberating or at the moment of voting for a verdict. So remember, in capital cases, you have 23 judges. It's not a tribunal of 3. So there's 23 judges. So there's going to be an order to who speaks and how they speak. It's going to take time and all this stuff. And at some point, they're going to have to vote, right? And if you vote on one day, a vote who decides to acquit, a guy who decides to acquit, right? And then they come back the next day to announce the verdict, presumably there's a verifying vote on the second day. We want to be sure. Who's who? How did you vote? Okay, so on 34A3, was that it? Or 34A? On 34A1, I don't know if you have it in front of you or not, but back on 34A1, we had a Mishnah that said on the following day, this is on the right side of 34A1, the judges come early to the court, and the one who argued for acquittal declares, I am the one who argued for acquittal, and I maintain my position in favor of acquittal. And the one who advanced an argument for conviction declares, I am the one who argued for conviction, and I maintain my position in favor of conviction. And the one who advanced an argument for conviction may now advance an argument for acquittal, but the one who advanced an argument for acquittal cannot reverse himself and advance an argument for conviction. Okay? So that's another Mishnah that expands the Mishnah that started our section of this chapter.
Can a judge abstain?
No. He could say, I don't know, but he can't abstain. He could say, it's just not clear to me. And we had that in an earlier Mishnah. In that case, they add 2 more judges to the case who hear all of the evidence and join the vote. And they keep doing that until there's a clear majority. And remember, in a death penalty case, it was a majority plus 1 had to vote to convict, but a simple majority can vote to acquit. So if you add 2 and one's not coming up with a vote, you really wind up having to add several more to get that majority of 2 eventually. Okay? Again, the system of jurisprudence is making it hard to convict and easy to acquit. Okay, so they've been debating all that. So let's go to 34A4, where we left off. I think where the Gemara suggests another example, right?
Yeah.
El Amar Rav Papa. Okay. So El Amar Rav Papa. Kidtani Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer. Mitoch Shene'amar, because it is stated, Kol hanogea b'mizbach yikdash, shome'ani bein ra'ui bein she'eno ra'ui. Talmud lomar kivasim ma kivasim re'uyin af kol ra'ui. Rabbi Akiva Omer ola ma ola re'uya af kol re'uya. So they're talking about sacrifices. Why? All right. So the Gemara suggests another example of things that are fit, that once they are fit, they can go forward, but once they're not fit, are they supposed to go forward on the altar or not? So the idea is if you've done something and you're mistaken about it, can you just accept the fact that you were mistaken, or does it invalidate the thing that you did? And this is like a sidebar conversation that is metaphorical about judges who have made mistakes or want to change their point of view. Those ideas are going to come back full circle after a little bit of rabbinic haranguing here. Okay, so Rav Papa says it can be found in what was taught in a Baraita. Remember, a Baraita is an age of the Mishnah teaching that did not make it into the Mishnah. So it's authoritative. Even though it's not in a Mishnah anywhere, it's got authority. It's a winning text. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili, back in Israel, says, since it is stated that whoever touches an altar becomes holy, that's in Exodus 29:37, I would learn that whether or not it is fit for the altar, it may not be removed once it is placed there. So, different altars were allowed to have different things. One might be a meal offering, one might be for sin offerings and so forth. So the question is, if you bring a kosher lamb to an altar that isn't supposed to have a kosher lamb on it, it's supposed to have a bull on it, but it is otherwise this kosher thing, does the sacrifice count on that altar, or do you take it off the altar, right? Do you actually remove that sacrifice from the altar because it's on the wrong altar? It's a perfectly kosher sacrifice by a perfectly well-meaning person on an altar of the proper God, but it's the wrong animal. Do you take it off the altar? or do you leave it on the altar? This verse, according to this interpretation, is even if it's not fit for the altar, it should be left on the altar. Talmud lomar kivasim, the Torah therefore said lambs in general in the next verse to teach just as lambs are fit for the altar, so too anything that is fit should not be removed from the altar. So if you look in footnote 3 at the bottom, the next verse in the Torah says, V'zeh asher ta'aseh ala mizbeach kivasim b'nei shana tamimim liyom tamid. This is what you offer on the altar, lambs for the first year, etc. So what the Talmud has done is there's a prohibition against taking things off the altar. Anything that touches the altar becomes holy. The next verse mentions lambs. Therefore, the Talmud is going to say the first verse was talking about lambs. Not necessarily, but sometimes people are like this, right? There's an old joke about the rabbi who remembered where he left his umbrella when teaching the Ten Commandments when he got to the prohibition against adultery. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Oh, I know where my umbrella is. Okay? The Talmud thinks this way. There's a verse, and then there's another verse that seems unrelated, but whatever's in that verse might actually be related to the first verse. You like that joke?
Why do they go from capital offense to altar?
They're talking about once something is done, is it acceptable even if it wasn't properly done? That's what they're dealing with, right? In the court of law today, in America, you can appeal a verdict if something was done wrong in the court, right? Like you might be guilty as sin and convicted of something you did, but if the judge allowed something to happen in the courtroom that's procedurally wrong, that's grounds for appeal. And you could take it to the higher court and they can say that the trial was done wrong, declare a mistrial, and either vacate the verdict and let the guy run free or order a new trial that the person, faces it again. That's kind of a question that we have here as far as if the judges have done something like allowed the testimony in the wrong way or the judge wants to reverse his verdict. Remember, we also had the case, the guy voted on day one and then he died and the next day they came in and one of the voting judges is dead. Does his vote still count? Right? Well, he might have changed his vote, but he didn't change his vote. But that's because he's dead. Right?
Well, what about intent? Intent is very important when you're bringing something to the altar. You think it's the right place to put it, but it may not be.
That's a great one.
It's your intent.
Yeah.
Judaism is based on, what did you intend to do?
What's your kavanah? What's your focus, right? So let's say I brought a 3-year-old animal to the altar for the Shabbat offering. And I was keeping Shabbat, and it's the right animal, and it's kosher, and it's on Shabbat, and I'm the priest, and I'm doing everything out of fervent love of God, love of Torah, desiring to observe the sacrifice and bringing the right animal but the Torah says, Kevasim b'nei shana. It has to be a 1-year-old lamb, right? And I brought a 13-month-old lamb to the altar, right? My kavanah was, impeccable. Why should the embarrassment happen that the other priest comes over and goes, that's the wrong animal, and they rip it off the altar, and there's this sense of what's important. Is what you intended the most important thing? Now, obviously, if I intended to give this Shabbat offering to God and I put a pig on the altar, take the darn pig off the altar, right? It's the wrong animal, right? So what the rabbis are talking about here is that which is fit for the altar may not be removed if placed there. So, a 13-month-old lamb is certainly fit for the altar, but I brought it at a time that the sacrifice of a lamb is supposed to be a 12-month-old lamb, right? So that's what they're arguing. So he's saying, Talmud lomar kivasim, just as the Torah says lambs, ma kivasim ru'in, just as lambs are fit for the altar, av kol ra'ui, anything that would have been fit should not be removed. And then Rabbi Akiva comes in and he says, olah. So in a burnt offering, which it says also in a subsequent verse, ma'olah ru'iyah, af kol ru'iyah. So just as an olah offering would have been fit for that altar, and you brought the wrong thing, but you brought a fit olah. So anything that is fit may not be removed, even if it is disqualified, even if it is. So I brought an olah instead of the Shabbat offering. So an olah is fit for the altar, but it's not the Shabbat offering. Do I get credit for the Shabbat offering? Well, maybe if I brought a keves, I do because of kavanah, but if I brought a ram, maybe it's too wrong to count, but it's still going to stay up there. We're not going to take it down. An olah is a burnt offering. It's an offering that the priests, they're all sacrifices. A burnt offering is an offering that the priest didn't get to eat any of the meat. The entire animal is burnt up entirely as a burnt offering. So it's only ash and smoke that comes from this offering. And there's a daily olah that it's a common offering, but not a common offering that people would have to give. Almost all the sacrifices people gave, people got to eat the meat. You sacrifice the animal, the innards and the yucky stuff gets burned, the animal gets roasted. Some of the meat, usually the best parts, go to the priest. The rest of the meat comes back to the person. What's that? During temple times. Right, so the sacrificial system was the way by which you got meat. And then the question was, are you allowed to do that in all of your towns with the local Kohen, or can that only be done at Jerusalem? And at different times in our history, the answer to that was different. Once the temple was destroyed, you could still kill animals for meat, and you had to follow the rules of what animal is kosher, but you couldn't obviously offer them anymore, because there's no temple to offer them in. Okay, so now, you may be saying, why the heck are we talking about altars and sacrifices? So, v'tarvaihu mai kamamatu. So what do both Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva, in this example, exclude from being sacrificed in the altar? Hang on. I don't want to send you down the garden path. 34b1. I'm on 34b1 now. There you go. Okay? 34b1. There's a joke in there. 34b1? What do you mean 34b1? 34b34. See?
Oh. You got up on the
Too
funny
early
side.
in the morning.
It's the afternoon, my friend. Okay, v'tarvaihu mai kamamatu. What do Rabbi Yosef Glili and Rabbi Akiva both exclude? So if they're being so, accepting, you brought the wrong age lamb, you brought a ram instead of a lamb, like, are you just going to let anything go up there on the altar? And the answer is pisule. Well, disqualified things, obviously, right? Mar mai tela mikvasim. One of the teachers, Rabbi Yosef Glili, derives it from the term kivasim, umar mai tela me'ola, and one learned it from the word olah. But the two of them are learning the same ruling, which you should recognize isn't a great situation for the Talmud, because you don't want two different Torah verses teaching one halacha. One Torah verse can teach a lot of halacha. Two Torah verses should not teach the same halacha. So they actually are having an argument. They're not having an argument about what they would or wouldn't take off the altar. They're having an argument over which word in the Torah taught us that. V'ha'amar Rav Adabar Ahava. But Rav Adabar Ahava, by the way, you know when it says Rav and Rabbi, what the difference is historically? Rav is always in Amora, so they're in Babylonia in the age of the Talmud. Rabbi is always of the Mishnah or a Baraita, and they're in the land of Israel. So anyone who's Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Haglili, lived before the Mishnah was finished, and their teachings are authoritative. Anybody who's a Rav is a later rabbi of the age of the development of the Talmud, and their stuff can get picked apart and argued with. They can be wrong. Rabbis of the Mishnah and the Braita can't be wrong. They can have differing opinions, but according to their opinions, they're right. And Amora can just be wrong. You can prove him wrong and be fine and walk away from him being wrong. Okay, so now we have Rav Ada, next level, interpreting the rabbis, Yossi Haglili and Rabbi Akiva. So Rav Ada Bar Ava said, Ola ha'of psula ika benayu. No, they don't. They're not disagreeing about the word olah or the word kivasim. Everyone would accept the kivasim, and it's not any olah, but it's that Rabbi Akiva said all olahs is what we learned from, and Rabbi Yehuda Aglili, Rabbi Yossi Aglili might have said that the bird olah is something I'm going to argue about. So a burnt offering can be different types of animals. One of them is a bird. All right, so what's the difference? Man d'mai la min kivasim, the one who derives the law from lambs, kivasim ein, yes, sacrifices of disqualified livestock such as lambs would remain on the altar. Aval olat ha'of lo. So Rabbi Yosef Glili, according to this interpretation, has an argument with Rabbi Akiva in the following scenario. He thinks that any keves, any lamb that you put up there, 13-month-old lamb, 2-year-old lamb, whatever, they all stay up there. But the person who brings a bird as a burnt offering, and it's the wrong kind of bird, that has to be taken off the altar. Why? I have no idea. But Ravada says that's what he's arguing about. That's why he didn't learn the law from Olah, because Olah can't teach you regarding the bird. Birds are cheap. Yeah, the poorest people all brought bird offerings. That was by far the most common offering. A lamb's expensive, and it's an investment of the family, and it's also, you can breed it, and it produces wool. It's got value in the economy. To slaughter a lamb is an enormous literal sacrifice. Taking the head off a pigeon is taking the head off a pigeon. Okay. Not if you're a pigeon. Uman demaite le me'olah, but the one who learned this halacha from the word olah would have said afilo olat ha'of nami. So Rabbi Akiva says we learn it from olah because it's any olah this rule applies to. And the reason that Rabbi Yossi Aglili said you can't learn it from olah is because the rule does not apply to a bird olah. Okay? That would have been their argument. That's it. Gemara suggests another example of one teaching being based on two different sources. So we're continuing to go through this concept of having a single teaching that is coming from two different Torah verses, and we don't like that. So with Rabbi Yossi Glili and Rabbi Akiva, who had two different verses for the same teaching, we proved it's not the same teaching. They actually have a disagreement, which is why they're using different verses. Okay? You can't have one teaching from two verses unless there's a disagreement.
So one is for the lamb and one is for the bird.
In Rabbi Akiva's court, the bird would be allowed, and in Rabbi Yossi Aglili's court, the bird would not be allowed.
They never really agree.
Rabbi Akiva lived down by Caesarea, and Rabbi Yossi Aglili lived up by Tiberias. The world wasn't as small as it is. You didn't get in your Prius and drive there in 15 minutes.
Did Rome sacrifice animals?
Rome sacrificed animals all the time, and they used them as auguries. They examined them to predict the future and omens and portents about whether they should go to war and all kinds of stuff. They used them like Ouija boards. They would use birds. They would use animals.
Oh, anything.
Lots of stuff. Sure. They didn't have kosher laws. No, Rome did not sacrifice people. Rome never had human sacrifice. They killed people for entertainment, and they killed people in war, and they persecuted people on pain of death and torture, but no, they would never give those people to their gods. They dedicated their battle in the Colosseum to their gods, and you might say that's a form of sacrifice. Go fight the wild lions for my entertainment, but it's not theologically really the same thing as a sacrifice. Okay? All right, next. So we're gonna follow the same kind of idea. Can you have two verses that teach the same law? Eventually, we will get back to our Mishnah. Ella Amar Rav Ashi. Okay, Kidiktanya, a case of Rav Ashi goes like this. It's taught in the Baraita. Dam yechashev laish hahu dam shafach. It shall be considered as blood for that man. He has spilled blood. Footnote: Leviticus 17:4. In the section prohibiting the slaughter of a sacrifice outside the temple courtyard, the verse teaches that one who slaughters a sacrifice outside is like a murderer. As a murderer is liable to capital punishment, so too one who slaughters a sacrifice outside the temple is punishable to karet, a divinely imposed premature death. All right. So you have, Okay? So there's a rule against sacrificing outside the temple precincts. And since it sounds like you're talking about spilling blood and being accountable for spilt blood, it sounds like murder. And so the rabbis make it sound like murder, and therefore they say it's a death penalty offense. But in this case, the death comes at the hands of heaven, not from the human court, but it's still a death penalty offense. So that's kind of the logic behind this verse in the rabbinic world. And so Rav Ashi says in this baraita that quotes that idea, lirabot et hazorek, it comes to include the one who sprinkles the blood as well. Remember, when you sacrifice an animal, you slit the throat and the windpipe, you collect the blood in a bowl, and then you go to the altar and you're sprinkling the blood in specific ways around the altar. That would have been the priest's duty. So if you're outside the temple precincts, you've got the pouring of the blood is an act, and the sprinkling of the blood is an act. Since the verse said he spilled blood, it would seem to be the one who is pouring the blood is subject to whatever this penalty is. Not necessarily the guy who then goes and sprinkles the blood. So if there's two people involved in it and one pours and one sprinkles, you could say the blood pourer is in a lot of trouble. The sprinkler's off the hook. Not so. According to Rav Ashi, this dam yechashev la'ish ahu dam shafach, the repeating of the word dam, blood shall be considered for that man has spilled blood, lirabot et hazorek. Both bloods, the pouring blood and the sprinkling blood, are both being included in this verse, right? Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, those are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva Omer, here's Rabbi Akiva again, O Zavach, or a sacrifice, which is 4 verses later, where there's a punishment over a sacrifice without talking about spilling blood. So, lerabot et hazorek. All right, so according to Rabbi Akiva, 4 verses later, when it says, if he pours blood, or 4 verses later, sacrifices, Rabbi Akiva says 4 verses later, the word sacrifices means to include the zorek, because the ritual of sacrifice isn't just killing the animal, it's actually sprinkling the blood. So the pourer of the blood is one guy, and the sacrificer is the other guy.
He should come first.
That's Rabbi Akiva's point of view. Okay, you have to include him. Okay, you have to pour the blood before you can sprinkle. The sacrificer is the sprinkler. I know you're thinking sacrificer is the one cutting the throat. For Rabbi Akiva, it becomes a sacrifice instead of just a dead animal when the blood is sprinkled. So the person who's sprinkling is the one who makes it a sacrifice. Before that, you just have a dead cow. Okay? So the killer is not the sacrificer. You have the pourer of the blood and the sprinkler who is the sacrificer. That's the moment it's called a sacrifice for Rabbi Akiva. You don't have to buy that. I actually agree with what your question entails, which is the person who slits the throat to make it a sacrifice is the sacrificer. But that's not what Rabbi Akiva is doing in this baraita. So we have to understand the baraita in its own terms. I'm with you. But we're both wrong. Okay?
Can one person carry 2 functions? Can one be
Yes. Yes, but you can only be killed once. So the question there would be if you're convicted of the pouring or you're convicted of the sprinkling, right? And you did both. Like,
There's no problem. No, I'm just wondering if there's specialists. So how could they?
I do believe that there would have been multiple people involved because it's a big, heavy, messy job. And I think they probably would have handed the bowl of blood up to a higher rank Kohen who's at the altar itself, who would have sprinkled. All this is happening, however, on the Mount of Olives. Somebody over there, outside of the temple, is daring to do this. And that's forbidden. So the real question is, what are they sprinkling on? If they don't have the altar over there, right?
A Kohen and a Levi are allowed to be convicted?
Yes, if they break a Torah law, sure, they're people.
What, you think, they think they're above the law?
They are more likely to get in trouble because there's so many Torah laws that apply to them, and there's so many severe penalties for the mishandling of sacred things. right? A Cohen and a Levi have to really know what they're
Well,
doing.
like Aaron's sons.
Exactly. Yeah, they get in trouble, right? Nadav and Abihu, they die because they go in and they offer the
Right.
strange fire that whatever that is, they die at the hands of God, right?
I don't know what procedure for, I'm thinking about like the sacrifices during the days of Sukkot.
Yeah.
They have many, many animals.
Take about 5 minutes.
Wow.
Maybe 5 minutes per animal. But they have a whole bunch of missionaries where they talk about, like on Simchat Beit HaShoeva and things like the festival at the end of Sukkot, where they have multiple stations set up and lines of people going to the different stations. Just like on Simchat Torah, we have multiple Torah reading tables to get through everybody quickly. They had multiple stations set up to receive sacrifices and process them. They had a fireman's line of buckets going up and down. What's that? Yeah, 40 on one day. You know how long it takes to cook 40 whole bowls? It's crazy.
It says here-
Ron's had his hand up.
There are synagogues on the outside of the Mikdash.
At least one, yeah. We have the Theodosius stone in the Rockefeller
So
Museum.
is that where this would be occurring at a?
No, the rabbis would never have sacrificed at the synagogue. This is either a renegade who's not doing things the way they're supposed to, some other god, I have no idea, or more likely, unlikely that it's just a lazy Cohen. It's more likely somebody trying to freelance on the side. It's getting paid for this, right? Because you're going to pay the Cohen. The Cohen's going to get some of the meat. And maybe he doesn't have duty up there, or he's out of favor with them, and he's not getting his shift, and man's got to make a living, and there's pilgrims waiting in line, and
Disagreeing with.
not everybody who offers you a ride at LaGuardia has a license. Right?
To feed his family.
So he might be going up to people who are making pilgrimage and saying, I can help you with that.
Good price.
Shmuley the Cohen, I give you a good price. Right? Okay. Whatever he's doing, it's wrong. And we're including so Zevach. So you have two verses which are both clearly saying that the person who does the zerika, who does the sprinkling, is included in the prohibition against pouring out the blood outside of the temple precincts. But two sources are reading it from two sources. Got it? That's the pattern. That's what the Gemara here is worried about. Okay, so let's see. Hey, Herb Rosansky's on. Hey, Herb, how you doing? Why aren't you here? Oh, I think he's in Florida. Okay, so Herb, we're on 34b1 in Sanhedrin. Okay. L'rabota tezorek. Now, v'tarvaihu mai kam rabbi. And so, what are they both going to include? So, what do they agree on? Zerika. They're both talking about sprinkling. Mar maitele mi dam yechashev. One's learning it from the repetition of the word dam in the verse, and the other is maitele mar maitele me ozevach. And Rabbi Akiva is learning it from 4 verses later where it says sacrifice. So that's again a case where there's 2 verses teaching the same law. You know that's not going to last. So the Gemara now objects to that. It says, but v'hamar Rabbi Abahu, but Rabbi Abahu, who is this Rav Abahu probably, shachat v'zorak ika benaihu. He says it's a difference between the 2 teachings based on the one who slaughtered and threw. There's your question in the back of the room. They differ on the law if he did both, the sacrifice and the blood, on an altar outside the temple. L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael eino chayav ela achat. He's, according to Rabbi Yishmael, liable for having broken one law by doing both things at the same time. And l'divrei Rabbi Akiva chayav shtayim. He's broken 2 laws. Why? Because the first opinion learned the command against pouring and sprinkling from a single verse. And therefore, if he broke that rule, pouring and sprinkling, he would owe 1 sacrifice as a sin offering. Whereas Rabbi Akiva has 1 verse and 4 verses later, another verse, you broke 2 different rules in the Torah, and that one person would owe 2 sacrifices. Now the 2 verses and the 2 opinions actually mean different things, so they're not in agreement, and it's not 2 verses teaching the same thing. Thank God. We should all be relieved. All right?
I was worried.
You were worried. L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael eino chayav el achad. All right, 34b2. The Gemara is. Oh, 34b2. Ding, 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 ding. And this time I have them ready to go.
Thank you.
Eliminate all your other papers. Don't look at them again. They will only confuse you. 34b2. Take. Enjoy. Okay. Sweet. It feels like progress to me. 34b2?
That's kind of like-
No, b1.
No, this is what you just gave me to
Okay,
pick out.
gotcha. 34b2. Gemara defends its example. Hayit marala, but it was stated in the Mishnah, Amar Abaye, af l'divrei Rabbi Akiva nami, eino chayav el achad. Ach, but we have a Mishnah that says, according to Abaye and according to Akiva, such a person is only owing one sacrifice. And we just objected a moment ago that what they differed was how many sacrifices they owed, and Rabbi Akiva was said that he owes two. But we have a Mishnah that says Rabbi Akiva explicitly says he only owes one. Therefore, that can't be a proper interpretation. Therefore, we still have a problem. Right? Eino chayav ela achad. Okay? De amar kra, sham ta'aleh al olatecha v'sham ta'aseh. Because the verse says, there you shall offer your olah, and there you shall do all that I command you. And in this verse, Aravin hu rachmana l'chul hu asiyot. The merciful one combined all performances into a single warning. In other words, every punishable transgression requires two scriptural sources to impose liability. One for the basic prohibition, the biblical warning, and the second for the punishment occurred of violating. A person is obligated to bring two chatat offerings for two violations only if the Torah gives two separate warnings for each. And in this case, only one warning was given, even though there's two verses, and therefore there's only going to be one sacrifice offered, and therefore that's not what it means when it, that's why, that is what it means when it says one in the other mission. So, they're still teaching two obligations, but there's another rule that says if a second warning wasn't given, you really only offer one, even though you are obligated to two. And so we have it both ways. Rabbi Akiva is teaching something different, but the practical outcome, because of this other Mishnah that we just quoted, is that there's only going to be one sacrifice given. So Rabbi Akiva agrees with that juridical rule, but he holds that really theologically you're still obligated to two sins, and therefore there's enough of a difference that you can't say two things are teaching the same thing, even though it has the same outcome. Okay? So the question was, are there two verses about the guy who is Zorek, and are they saying the same thing? The answer is they're not, because it's a second chatat obligation. Even though in this case, because there's not a warning, he doesn't have to give more than one chatat punishment sacrifice. So visually, it looks like he's only offering one in either case, but in one of the cases, when he offers one, he should have offered two, except for this reason of no second warning, he's not going to be made to offer two. Rabbi Akiva agrees with both of those statements, and that's fine. So we don't have two verses teaching the same thing, even though the practical outcome looks identical. Everyone okay?
Is this the only instance where there's one word that's doing both? That
No.
has two interpretations?
No,
Or that
the Talmud
one-
makes its bread and butter on that,
Following-
and denying that it's happening.
Maybe only on this.
If that were the case, if that were the case, you could reduce this thing down to one volume.
Okay, so returning to, keep your finger on 34b2, and if you wish to look at 32a1, where our Mishnah lives, this big, long, sprawling Mishnah that started this part of the chapter, we are slowly working our way down the Mishnah, and we are nearly at the end. Dinei Mamanot. On 32a1, the end of the Mishnah went like this. Dinei Mamanot danin bayom v'gomrim balayla. Danin nefashot dinei nefashot danin bayom ugomrim bayom. So monetary cases are tried by day and may be concluded at night. Dinei Mamanot danin bayom. That's the line. Monetary cases are tried by day and may be concluded at night. Ready? So what do you think is going to be the question that the Gemara first asks? We've gotten in the pattern for the last 3 sections of Gemara, the same thing. There's a rule in the Mishnah. What's the Torah verse? Right? So we're in search of Torah verses to justify these rules in the Mishnah. Either the authors of the Mishnah are making up rules on their own authority, or they're basing every single line of the Mishnah on some verse of Torah. And we know the answer has to be the latter. It has to be based on some verse of Torah. So that's what's happening here. So Dinei Mamanot Danin Bayom V'Gomrim Balayla. All right, ready? Here we go. Oh, we have a mnemonic, siman. Every time you word the sinam followed by letters with chupchuks, little apostrophes and stuff, it's an abbreviation, which is meant to make it easier for you to remember, and it never does. Mishpat, ma'aneh, mate. So those letters, mem, shin, pei, tet, mem, ayin, nun, hey, mem, tet, hey, will be the first letters of a series of cases and words that will help you remember why monetary cases can be tried by day and finished at night.
I just say Riyadh, or in this case, Riyadh.
What do we have any scientists in the room?
I know, but I'm just saying shorten for our purposes.
Maybe biologists? What from kingdom down to species, what is the order of stuff? Kingdoms, phylums, classes, orders, families, genus, species. How do I know that?
Because you studied with your kids.
Because I memorized, when I first took biology, kings play chess on fine glass surfaces.
Oh, God, that's like,
Now, for some reason, it's easier for me to remember kings play chess on fine glass surfaces than it is kingdom, phylum, class, and so forth. But if I take kings play chess on fine glass surfaces, I take the first letter of each word, and I know that it's the next letter is starting with that I can come up with king, phylum, class, order, family, etc. It works.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the gobbledygook of the mnemonics in the Talmud are not always as helpful. But you have one of these that you're familiar with, right? Datsach,
Oh, the tzach, the adas.
the Adash, the
It's in the
Timrot Hashan.
Haggadah.
Yeah, it's in the Haggadah when you're trying to remember the order of the plagues you're mentioning, and they're spelled out in the Haggadah. That little weird moment where you take the extra 3 drops out and you say the gobbledygook words. It's a mnemonic that's meant to teach you all the other things. All right. Anyway, so we're going to have a mnemonic, so we have to figure out what the letters relate to in the coming passage. Okay? So, minahanemile, our favorite word, where do these teachings come from? Amar Rabbi Chia bar Papa. Rabbi Chia bar Papa said, Amar Kra, V'shaftu et ha'am b'chol eit. They shall judge the people at all times. Do you see the word shaftu in the mnemonic? Shapat. Shaftu.
Mishpat.
Yeah, from mi, shapat. So that's mi shapat. And this was shaftu. So the first verse that answers this question is the verse that begins, V'shaftu et ha'am b'chol eit. You shall judge the people at all times. If it's all times, it includes the nighttime. Okay?
How much of the nighttime? It doesn't say.
All of it. All times.
The whole night.
But the Gemara objects. Ihachi tchilat din nami. If so, then the beginning of the trial could also begin at night. And remember, the Mishnah said, Dinei Mamanot, you can start in the day and finish at night. It doesn't say you can start at night.
And finish in the day.
So the presumption in the Mishnah is you're always starting in the day. But if your proof text for finishing at night is you can judge the people at any time, then you should be able to start at night too. So it's a lousy proof text. It gives people permission to do anything, and we know that's not true. It's a good objection, actually. The Gemara says, Ki de Rava, but you can understand it the way Rava did. De Rava Rami, that Rava noted the contradiction between two verses. One was Kativ, it was written, V'shaftu et ha'am kol eit, you judge people at any time. Uchativ, in another verse says, V'haya bayom hanchilo et banav. But it was written elsewhere, it shall be on that day that he bequeaths to his sons. So, bequeathing to your sons is a legal act that can only be done in front of a Beit Din. Therefore, since he did it during the day, you know you need to have a Beit Din during the day. Is that a good proof? That's a lousy proof. If you already know what the rule is, it's perfectly good. It matches what you think the rule is, but by itself, you wouldn't have come up with it from that. You could have said something else. You could have said, well, bequests need to be done during the day. And it's one of the Dinei Mamonot. Bequests is a monetary case. Kol hakavod, absolutely, good job. But it's not the only kind of monetary case. So I can get off of that interpretation easily by saying, oh, it's just that one kind of monetary case during the day. So it's not a good proof text. Okay? Ha-ketzad, how is this contradiction to be reconciled? Yom tchilat din, only by saying the day is the time for the beginning of the trial. Velela legmar din, and the nighttime is for concluding a trial. So Rava noted that the other one verse says you can judge at all times, and the second verse says the bequest has to happen in the day. And the answer to that is that all things that have to do with money start in the day and they can end at any time. That is a resolution. It's not a forced resolution. So it's not a really good proof. It's not a bad explanation, but it's a lousy proof. Difference between an explanation and a proof?
Proof is definite.
An explanation makes it reasonable. A proof makes it unavoidable.
Now, what is this when he bequeaths to his son?
I give my son my Mercedes.
Now, he's not being brought up for this. In other words, if he owes money, if it's
So the son now wants to collect the Mercedes, and his brothers want him to sell it and split it 3 ways. So you have to bring that in front of the court. It's probate court.
Oh.
Okay? All right. What else we got? A dissenting view is noted. Matnitin de law ka Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah does not seem to concur with Rabbi Meir. Ditanya, as it is taught in another Baraita. Haya Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir used to say, Ma Talmud lomar, al piem yeh kol ri v'chol naga. Why does the Torah say, by their word shall every dispute and affliction be decided? And if you look at the footnote, this confers authority on the Kohanim to render judgment in monetary disputes, to rule on the tzara'at, skin diseases, and so forth. Okay? So this empowers the Kohanim to be judges over the people. V'chi ma'inyan rivim etzel nigaim. Now, what connection is there between monetary disputes and nigaim, skin afflictions? Alamakish rivim nigaim. We must therefore conclude that the Torah is comparing money disputes to skin afflictions in the following way. Ma nigaim bayom, just as afflictions can only be examined by day, you need good light. Dichtiv uviyom heraot bo, and as it is written, on the day that the healthy flesh appears. So it says, on the day the healthy flesh appears means the Kohen is examining it during the day. So inasmuch as the afflictions are done during the day, af rivim bayom, so monetary disputes are also by day. Uman negaim shalo bisumim, and just as the afflictions are not examined by a blind Kohen, dichtiv lechol mare einei Kohen is written wherever the eyes of the Kohen can see. So obviously a blind one can't do it. Af rivim shalo bisumim. So too, disputes on monetary cases cannot be adjudicated by blind judges. Which is just an aside at the end of the Baraita. The main point was to say that there's cases that begin by day and when they get concluded.
They be more, not just more allegorical here, like not like they're blind to the issue.
I think they mean blind. Not seeing. Eyes don't work, blind.
That's why it's good to be
I think that would be.
Remember,
But I'm talking
the
about-
idea of a blind judge isn't crazy in the ancient world, because Torah and Mishnah was, even though Torah is Torah shebichtav, it's written, Mishnah was Torah sheba'al peh. Mishnah was memorized law. So a blind person can be fully functional in a court of law when Mishnah is on the line, Mishnah and Baraita and Gemara and all this stuff, because the law was a memorized law. It was recited by professional reciters. It wasn't a written law. But they're saying in these cases, obviously a blind Kohen would not be able to examine skin afflictions. And since the trial by day is being connected because of grammar between the skin affliction case and the monetary case for the Kohen, so if the Kohen can't be blind in the skin case, he can't be blind in the monetary case, which is not necessarily logical. It's just the verses that are making them do this, because that's how rabbis think.
Question, this is kind of an aside where case begins in the day, but it can go into the evening. Once it's in the evening or the nighttime, isn't that really the second day?
The rabbis don't do that all the time. So what Bonnie's asking is, we have been taught, drilled into our skulls, that the Jewish day begins at sunset. You light candles and Shabbat begins. You light the yortzeit for the memorial, and the next morning you go to shul, right? So we have memorized and learned, Yom Kippur begins with Kol Nidre. The truth is, neither the Torah nor the Talmud hold so clearly to that view. And there are many, 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 many places where the day is presumed to begin at sunup and end when you go to sleep, just like our day. So you have to just roll with that. Here we're definitely thinking it begins by day and doesn't end by night.
There's certain fasts that begin at night, and there's certain fasts in the Torah that begin at night.
All the minor fasts that begin at sunup end at sundown. They don't go into the next day, right? But if you go and you study the laws of the Passover offering, and you try and make sense of, you picked the animal and you slaughtered it on the 14th and then you ate it, well, the evening is the 15th, but it says you eat it on the 14th. But you can't slaughter it in the evening because you won't have time to cook it. So you're obviously slaughtering it on the 14th, and you're eating it that night, which is being called the 14th.
You can't run into the next day.
But you have to. The Passover Seder has to be at night.
No, it's open 24 hours.
Okay, but then the 24-hour period has sundown in the middle of those 24 hours.
Because you have to finish the soup.
So you're going from sunup to sunup for your day, not sundown to sundown for your day. Well, that's a problem, right? And the truth of the matter is, it's a problem that we invented in the last couple of thousand years by creating the system so strictly as we have it. And if you go back and you read, even Ezra does this in his commentary on Shabbat. He says days began at sunup. And then he has to deal with, why does God say there's evening and there's morning a first day? Because how can there be evening? What was the first act of creation? No. What was the first act of creation? That's the fourth day, but okay.
No, day and night.
Day. But Yehi or, let there be light. The first act of creation is light. So the first day began
It's all.
with sunup. Because prior to that, there was nothing. Vayehi erev. And then the evening came, and the day was a day. Right?
Yeah.
And then the next day, when the sun came up, he made a bunch of stuff. And then there was an evening with that day. It's the second day. In other words, the days are going from morning into night for the days of creation. Even though it says Vayhi Erev Vayivoke, there was evening and there was morning a day, that doesn't make any sense at all in how things actually are created. And Vayhi Erev means, and at the end of that day, Vayhi Erev. And then the evening came. Vayhi Boker, and there was a morning after, which ended the first day.
So it's 24 hours.
So when it says Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker, the Boker in Vayhi Erev Vayhi Boker is not the Boker of the day that the Erev is a part of.
This is the next day.
I'm creating on the second day, and then Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, Yom Sheni. Yom Sheni is measured off when there's a Vayhi Boker for Yom Shlishi. That's what Ibn Ezra does with it. Rashi gets very put out.
Well, even the
He'll get over it.
Christians do the evening and the.
Yeah.
And the
Well, the Christians, the high church Christians do the evening. They'll have Christmas Eve, for example.
Right.
The high church Christians do. The others, it's only on those days because they're just making it bigger. But Christmas is,
Christmas Eve.
Lahavdil. Okay, we can stop there. 34b3. We're at 1 o'clock. We'll do this last Baraita on the left side, and then we'll get into talking about blind people, because that just came up.
You know, they almost have the same thing today as the afternoon.